The universe is a love story. For me, it's just a beautiful way to make sense of it all. What would your life look like if you followed what you were drawn to? And this feeling of being drawn to something is something you can't really explain. Everything around me has been a distraction in many ways. And I was always going outside of myself to seek, but I'm starting to realize and experience, oh, there is this internal guidance, and it has little nuanced ways of showing itself. I think you're right. In the Western world, especially, you have very individualistic culture, is very competitive, a lot of narratives and dynamics in the society that emphasizes separation. But now I think the world is awakening to that capacity in ourselves to really be individuals, but as how do you be an individual, an empowered individual that serves the collective? And the beautiful thing about life is that if you really look for it, if you really understand this to be true,
Welcome to the Spirit Unfolding podcast, where we explore the depth of the human experience, the creative energy that runs through us all, and what we can do to create a more beautiful world. My name is Lars, and every episode I sit down with a creative, pioneer or teacher in the fields of spirituality, art, health, and the natural world. We want to give you actionable insights to spiritual growth, taking ownership of your life and expanding your perspective on life's possibilities. Also, you can live a more authentic, loving, and fulfilling life. I am honored that you chose to spend your valuable time listening to the Spirit Unfolding podcast. And you would really help us by subscribing to YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcast, and sharing the episode with your family and friends and on social media. Thank you so much. My guest today is Idan Shahidi, who was introduced to me only last month from a mutual friend. And we resonated so much right away in that first moment that I just had to get him on the podcast. I think he's an absolutely fascinating guy who I can't stop listening to as he manages to bridge some of the biggest problems our society faces today with the worlds of nature, love, and consciousness. In this more philosophical episode, Idan and I went deep into the structure of reality, the complexity of nature, and the biggest challenges of society like poverty, war, racism, and mental health. We played with questions like what is love? What is the nature of life? What does it mean to be human? And how can we use a different perspective of the workings of the universe to heal, connect, and create a more beautiful world? This was a massive episode of over 2.5 hours, and I'll definitely go back myself to extract all the insights that Idan has brought. I hope this episode will give you something new and inspiring. Let's dive in.
it's beautiful to be here. Thank you, Lars.
And just before we were chatting about what would love do? And maybe that's you also talked about I want the theme to be the universe is a love story. So where did that come about, and what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I mean, the universe is a love story. I think for me, it's just a beautiful way to make sense of it all in a way. And I've found kind of through my exploration and reading and experience, it kind of boils down to this essence of love. And when I speak to love, I think, love doesn't necessarily have a form. Of course it can, which is acts of love or something like that. But I think the essence of it is really this field, this energy. And that has really significant impact to people, to the world, to your way of relating. And so if you can get to a place of embodying this love in yourself a little bit more, I think it comes off in how you relate to the world. And I think the quality of the way that you relate to the world increases your experience of being human. Because love is in the same, realm of feeling compassion, curiosity, joy, but also the sadness and the grief. But of course, with the lens of love, it holds a different kind of energy to it or essence to it. And I would say, the universe is a love story. I mean that quite literally as well, because if you look at how the universe came to be, um, the universe in its infiniteness, in its complexity, um, it started from, some say, a singularity and turned into what we see today and what we experience today. And I think uh, there is a property in the universe, in the world, that's called emergence. This is kind of the notion of how things come into existence between two things that previously were individual, but now there is, something new that emerged from something that didn't exist before. And this is kind of like the closest thing to magic that we can feel, is this property of emergence. And if you really click into what emergence is the result of a synergy between things that come together. And, before a synergy happens, you have relationships, kind of free floating relationships. And this is kind of how the universe started, right? It's like all of a sudden there's randomness, there's all these things in the atmosphere, and some forces came into existence, gravity, electromagnetism, whatever it might be. And for whatever reason, these forces help bring things into closer relationship. And some of those relationships were compatible, to say the least, in such a way that they came together in a synergistic way and created something new, whether it's a star or a plant. And so I think love is also kind of describing how things come to life. It's things, whether it's people coming into relationship and having this chemistry, and then they find themselves in a loving relationship, or coming in contact with ideas or things, certain things, when you come into close relationship with, through whatever forces that exist, and you actually, I think, have some control over those forces, you kind of open up yourself to, the potential of the emergence of something that's like profound. So that the whole notion of the universe as a love story is kind of following this property of emergence, which is the property of how things come to exist. Things start as as potential, as light, as quanta of light, and they interact with seeds or soil, or and things start to come together, and all of a sudden you have a plant, and there's these like powers that are gained, some process that this initial light goes through, and then you have this plant or animal or human or something. So there's something special, I think, to this property, because I really think it's like the closest thing to magic, and we actually can understand it. There's actually a little bit of understanding around this notion of emergence. And so maybe we can use that, in our own lives. Like when we speak about manifestation, I think there's an essence of manifestation that is represented in this, Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's the universe as a love story. And I think it's a beautiful way to capture it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did you come to this insight? How has your journey been to get there? So I know you've done a lot of different, in terms of like work and just where you focus your energy on. You've done a lot of different things, bringing you into contact with all kinds of different people and energies. And how did you come to this insight?
It's a beautiful question. And without getting too technical, I think I'll just kind of share where I guess the idea of emergence came to me, which is, for the past several years, I've been working in international peace and conflict, looking at very complex problems in different parts of the world that are, at the root of armed conflict specifically. And, the question that we were tackling is like, how do you bring peace to the world? How do you address complex problems? And that was the first time I was introduced to this word complexity, like in its essence. And so my study became to understand complexity theory, and realizing that the world is very complex, but we don't really understand what that means. And it actually is a problem, because we have we address complex problems with simple or complicated solutions. So we're not really addressing or finding solutions that really address and tolerate complexity.
Especially like if you look at science, it's all like about measuring one very specific thing and sort of trying to leave out everything else.
Exactly.
And in that sense, also, if you go, for example, in a clinical trial where you're like actually bringing stuff into the lab, not even mentioning maybe the effect of fluorescent lights, but just the fact that we're taking something out of its natural habitat where it's connected to everything else. We're taking it out and then we're studying it and we're trying to figure out one thing that's not a representation of life.
It's not a representation of life, exactly. And at scale, that becomes costly, right? And so you have a world now where we're not really addressing the nature, where we've misdiagnosed the nature of the problems we tend to solve. You know, we have these problems, whether it's climate change or you know, politics or sea level rising or soil erosion, whatever it might be.
Poverty,
racism, war. These are complex issues. And of course, I'll get to that point in a second, just to finish the thought. We've misdiagnosed, the nature of the problem. And so how we're addressing those problems doesn't really solve them or address them in a way that can have an emergent solution to it. And when you look at complexity, coming back to emergence, complexity requires an emergent solution. You can't predetermine a solution to a complex problem. It's kind of silly, you know, to say, oh, and you see this very often where, you know, politicians are like, okay, we want to enact these policies to solve a very complex problem. And so complexity is requires a very multifaceted approach to addressing, you know. At the same time, this word complexity, I know, you know, has many connotations perhaps. And I became very obsessed about this word for a long time, because I was like, my experience in the world and what I'm experiencing in myself doesn't seem to be explained through science alone or reason alone. There's some other like nuances and novelties and experiences that I see and I observe and I feel, but I don't yet know how to understand them. And so when I came across complexity theory, I was like, okay, this starts to actually like put language to some of these experiences and the things that I see in the world. And so that path kind of led me to, kind of understand how to complex problems and realizing, okay, we're trying to solve complex problems in very simplified ways. But the reality is complexity is something that's, I think this is important to note. I've actually now changed the word complexity in my mind to infinity.
Oh, wow.
And so when I made that switch, something kind of woke up in me and it was like, okay, how do you deal with infinity? How do you embrace the infinite? You can't as a single individual human, even as a humanity. And so I realized that that's also like a core issue at the individual level, at the personal development level. It's you exist in this universe in this world with of infinity. You know, how do you navigate? What are the tools and mechanisms that you use to navigate within it, and to make sense of it? You know, you can't really make sense of all of the options and all of the choices. So how do you do good choice making? You know. And so I think eventually I started to be exposed to, you know, spirituality then showed up for me as one of these tools or several tools and kind of an ecology of practices to say, okay, you're this little boy, little human being in this complex world, and you come into this world and evolve in this world with a lot of programming, conditioning, and fears and stories and insecurities and vulnerabilities and da 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 da. And all of these are kind of protection mechanisms for yourself. And so then we kind of go into adulthood and we realize we're actually like quite disconnected from who we really are anymore, you know, in our truest essence. And so I've recently also come to understand that, I mean, I don't want to go too much on a tangent, so I'll just bring us back quickly of tying this back to the idea of how do you navigate the complexity of the world? What are the tools and mechanisms? And we unfortunately live in a world where we also can't outsource the sense making of the world to institutions or parents or schools, because there isn't somebody that does it well, you know. So you really have to rely on yourself to do good sense making. In other words, to make sense of the world and choose how to operate in it, because school is telling you one thing, your parents are telling you one thing, your fears are telling you one thing, you know, modern society is pulling you in this direction, that direction. And so I feel that people, you know, often get lost in this, or are pulled in directions that maybe they didn't consciously choose to go. And so over time, you know, unless you really address it, and I think it shows up in tension in your body as disease, as anxiety, as depression, something, but it's your inner higher mind, soul, whatever you want to call it, kind of calling for you and saying, hey, we're disconnected. Come back to me, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm your guidance. So we actually all have this unique inherent mechanism to guide us. You can call it whatever, your highest self, your true self, your soul, your God. And so I've really come to realize that mechanism is the thing that I personally really want to build more intimacy with. Everything around me has been a distraction in many ways, you know, and I was always going outside of myself to seek. But I'm starting to realize and experience, oh, there is this internal guidance. And it has little nuanced ways of showing itself. You know?
It can be a voice in your head. It can be a gut feeling, a sense, synchronicities.
Yeah.
Someone saying a certain thing that resonates in a different way than anything else that's being said or shared, or many different ways.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the way to navigate this complexity of the world, this infinity, is not to look outside, but to look inside. Or is it more complex than this?
It is. And that's where I want us to be comfortable. It is a paradox, you know, it is, and it's both in a certain way, because we live in relationship to the external. But yes, the foundation of it is internal, I would say, because it's something that lives within you. And it is kind of this intimacy that you have to build with it. You know, I think, again, our intuition is, and of course, your intuition isn't always a strong intuition or a good intuition, but it's an intuition. It's making sense of things in a way that you can't yourself point to or calculate. It has this magical operating system, you know, where it nudges you. And sometimes that reveals itself. I think for me, like the most clear way that I can sense my intuition is calling, is the feeling of being pulled.
Not pushed, but pulled.
And not pushed. And it's a very slight distinction. But for me personally, I've tried to notice it. Where am I feeling pulled? And where am I feeling pushed? Another way I think about it is kind of expansive or retractive, you know? And for a while, I didn't know what that meant. Okay, I'm being pulled. I'm feeling this curiosity over here. I'm feeling an excitement over here, or my passion is over here. But then several things would block that. And those things are fears. Those things are the stories that I have about myself, or about what I need to do and my expectations, what I should do, what's right, what's wrong. And so I didn't honor that for a long time. And it's a work in progress. I mean, it's something you have to constantly, in every moment, remember. So I'm realizing life is really about moment to moment remembering of who you are and the bigger picture, and realigning yourself, and just noticing, okay, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And so the curiosity for me is, and for people, what would your life look like if you followed what you were drawn to?
Mm-hmm.
And this feeling of being drawn to something is something you can't really explain.
Yes, and it's something that can feel very, very scary, because then the head comes in like 2 milliseconds later and tells us all kinds of reasons why that's not the right direction. Why it's better to go somewhere else because it's safer, or it's comfortable, or we have control there and not here. We don't know what's going to happen here.
Exactly.
But yeah, I've been practicing more and more with this over the last years, and I've really felt like there's a lot of times where you cannot put your finger on it, and you definitely don't know what's going to happen. But if you follow that pull, eventually something happens that's more magical and more positive than anything you would have imagined or would have had control over if you would have followed your head.
I think one important thing to make clear is for you to also become intimate with the distinction between your intuition and your addiction. For me as well, this was, okay, I'm being pulled to go out or to distract myself and the feeling is very similar, And so this is part of the self-understanding is, okay, where am I? How am I discerning between me being pulled somewhere from a place of addiction or instinct or habit versus a place that feels more from a place of authenticity and truth and has a little bit more of this quality of this feels conscious to me, or resonates with me. And you soon, if you start to notice that, you'll start to, understand the language that your intuition speaks a little bit more, and like train it and build on it and come back to it. But it's important, I think, to really, become familiar. And I think for me, if my intuition is drawing me, or this pull is drawing me to something that is towards some truth, beauty, or good, it's kind of like a qualification of, okay, maybe good. That my intuition is pulling me. What if I moved with it? Because half of it is your intuition pulling you, but you have to take the step.
Of course.
Before your mind comes in and makes sense of your way out of it,
I'm thinking of the ceiling mural in Rome of Adam and God. Like, it will come to you, but you also have to meet it halfway.
Yeah. And I would say this has been one of my own personal challenges, is like taking action, taking the step, moving from your mind to your heart to your hands. And I think there is a gift, for me, I feel like I have this ability to, think in the realm of complexity, in the sense of being able to kind of have a lot of awareness about different variables and situations and sensitivities and able to connect dots and so forth. But there is a risk of indecision or decision-making paralysis where you're like, I don't know what to do. There's too many things. I can see all sides of this. So I don't know what side to take. But there's also a gift in that, and if you can really be with the gift of seeing things from various different sides, I think we have this tendency to want resolution, want to make a clear choice, or want to kind of have things defined and simplified. And so can you be in the absence of the resolution? How can you live in the absence of resolution? You will have a much more peaceful, content life and more in harmony with the laws of the universe, I would say, and that's where a lot of, I think, the struggle and anxiety and different diseases kind of, partially roots from, is our longing for certainty in a world that is fully uncertain. Anything can happen,
Yeah, we always want to have control when sometimes, although maybe mostly unconsciously, we'd rather be right than happy. If happiness means letting go.
Yeah.
It's too scary to let go. Or we're just not used to it. It's really like what you touched on before, like it's really about practicing to tune into like, what does this voice or this feeling really feel like if it comes from that place, and what does it feel like when it comes from this place?
Yeah.
Am I acting out of habit or out of this fear for like a lack or something, or control, or am I trusting and surrendering?
So I think I would love to come back to trusting and surrendering, because that's part of this realm of what we're speaking to. But I wanted to also come to, because this is, I think this is a note to self of taking action and realizing that we live in a world, this environment is one of doing. I've spent so much time up here trying to intellectualize my way through life and development and what I'm going to do and what I'm going to be and relationship. But more and more I'm realizing this experience is one of doing, is one of contribution, is one of service. And that's really how healing also works. Going and doing mantra and yoga and these things and meditation are tools that help me in that process. But I need to go and experience it. I need to go and do things to really change. I can't watch 100 YouTube videos and 100 lectures, which I do, and I feel this like dopamine hit of like, I resonate with that. Like, hopefully I'll wake up tomorrow and, have that fully imbued in my body. But my lesson and my learning right now is to really lean into the doing. And I think, having said that, when I look at my own experience and I guess humans in general, we have different modes of existence. There's like, I'll name them quickly, of being, doing, and becoming. Being is like in the present moment. This is where the richness of life can really be felt, and being in tune with what is beautiful around you. How much you can be aware and attentive to the beauty of life really increases your quality of life, The second is doing. And to me, this is the idea of creating beauty. So there's like experiencing and seeing the beauty of things. Doing is creating beauty, adding to the beauty of life. And becoming is increasing your being and your capacity to do to create more beauty. It's becoming is doing what you need to do to contribute more beauty to the world. And it works in this like trifecta. I think the core of it is like being present, being in your being, and witnessing the beauty around you, and training your attention to seeing beauty or love or whatever you want to call it. But I think for me personally, it helps me to come back to that understanding of where's the beauty in this situation that feels miserable or dire or stressful, or there's nothing here.
Yeah.
And your attitude in those moments. Viktor Frankl in his book Man's Search for Meaning talks about this. He's at a concentration camp, but he realized his power of his attention and his attitude of his experience. And in a situation that's, as miserable as that might be, or for yourself, you're in these lows of your life, can you see the beauty? Because it's there. And your ability to constantly come back to that is your power. And I also think beyond the power it has on yourself, it's one of your greatest impacts on others, because I think that's why everybody is so unique and has something to give to the world, is because they see differently than you. In other words, they might notice a beauty that you don't see. And in them sharing or communicating that beauty, now you get to see beauty. And you have a felt experience when you see beauty, and this is love, and this is your higher frequency of existence. And I lost track of the initial thought. So if anything came up for you, I'm curious.
Well, I really love this sense of this idea of beauty, because it's like it really brings us to nature as well, where I've recently felt more and more like, I wouldn't say not feeling at home, but like feeling that in our modern society and especially modern architecture, everything's straight lines, everything's boxes. We try to box everything, we try to label everything, but nothing in nature is straight. It's all like, it's complex, but it's also, there's this curvature and this fluidity, and there's like, the torus energy field and the golden ratio, and there's, it's this fractal structure to reality, to the universe, to life. And that's really something that I felt like I really want to tune more into that. And also like very something that's very in the moment for me is like my girlfriend and I are looking to buy a house soon and to move in together, and that's also something that I really want to be aware of when we're like looking at this house and start like giving it our touch. Is like, how can we bring in nature and this feeling of being connected, even though we're in it's still a square box, but like, how can we make it not feel as a square box? And I'd really love for you to dive into that. Like, how do you bring nature into to give us an idea, to make sure that our perception isn't labeled in boxes?
It's a beautiful question. And you're right. We are conditioned to be in these 4x4 walls and so forth. But I come back to, there's beauty in that in itself, right? In the concept of the line. Maybe you don't find it in nature and in the same way we do here, but I think to me this points to a needed understanding or approach or openness, which is to really start to integrate nature with non-nature, or and bring in different elements that I guess make you feel the ways that you want to feel. I think And I don't know if I have a good answer to this. For me, I mean, when I think about when I put my design hat on, there actually is profoundness in the straight wall. You know, you look at churches, you have and these the columns of, you know, there is these long, and they have a energy and they speak something. If you really zoom in, they're not straight. You know, if you go into the molecular, the atomic level, I mean, it's not straight, but our perception of it is straight. But I think unless you're building your own home where you can really play with shape and geometry and really disrupt the conventional, I think that's the idea, is how do you disrupt the conventional is kind of, I think, what you're asking me. And if you're limited, if your constraint is this is our house, it's 4 walls, straight walls, how can you disrupt it as much as you can with color, with maybe break parts of the wall off or add greenery all over the place, you know? And this is, I think, the idea is for you to get creative. And I think this might be an invitation for you and your girlfriend to play and to see, can we actually make this into a space that feels what nature might make us feel, or what a creative space might make us feel, rather than being stuck on, oh, but this is a house with 4 walls and we don't want 4 walls, you know?
No, of course.
Yeah.
And then also, like, if you zoom out a bit more, like, how do you then make it practical when you have there's certain constraints to our society and to life that we just have to work with. We cannot change a complete structure of society tomorrow. We cannot change all the buildings. We cannot change how, you know, a government is being set up overnight. But how would you then, you know, from what you've learned, how do you then build the bridge?
Yeah. I think the word constraint is a powerful one here. And I think going back earlier to talking about how the universe evolved as a process to realize itself, constraint was a part of that process, because things tend to move from full kind of freedom and potential down to kind of a point of constraint where things have been refined or identified, and they kind of come to a point of constraint. In the case of the house, and constraint gives rise to the next iteration of something. Something emerges from constraint. Constraint is, okay, things have come together in such a unique way into something, you know, that has now powers to reemerge into something. I think constraint, it's difficult, right? Because as you said, it's things that we can't control. Again, I would invite you to look at what's your relationship with things that you can't control. What's your relationship with constraint? It's not really the constraint that's the issue.
Right.
It's your relationship that's with the constraint. And there's many ways, but 2 primary ways you can see it is as an inhibiting force or as potential again. Constraint always moves back into potential, and potential moves back into constraint, and so on and so forth. And that's how evolution kind of happens in a way.
It can be an invitation to be more creative, to look at things from a different angle.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a hard one. I mean, you have constraint at the level of the house is an annoyance, an inconvenience perhaps, but you go into the more macro and you look at the world and there are many constraints, and some people experience those constraints much more intensely and frequently, and they use a lot of energy to fight the constraint, for example. Again, it comes back to what is your relationship with that constraint, and are you going to spend your energy to, I don't know, try to fight it, or are you going to spend the energy to try to be creative and find your way into the freedom again, into something more creative? until you reach your next constraint.
Yeah.
The constraint is a property of life. It's not something to be feared in certain situations. Of course, it's scary and inhibiting and so forth. But yeah, it's interesting, and I'd like to spend time thinking about constraint a little bit more, because I think I see it I see it with some bias, but I think there's a lot more wisdom in constraint than I think I even know myself.
Yeah, I love that whole notion, and it brings me also to a good friend of mine. That's, one of the sort of mantras he's always using for life is like, if you run into an obstacle, it's like, okay, zoom out. What is possible here?
Yeah, exactly.
And
zoom out
and just look at like, okay, now I'm like with my nose against the wall. But if I like step back, maybe I can just walk around, or maybe I can hop over, or maybe someone else can help me, or like there's all these different things. And for me, what's really changed my life is to no longer go into this victim mentality, that to really, I mean, maybe sometimes I still do, but like I try to be aware of it as much as possible, of like, not in that sense, you're giving control away, instead of just taking ownership and being like, okay, this is where I'm at now. Whether this has happened due to external circumstances or my own doing, and it's probably always some part is your own doing, but like not fighting it or being like sort of let down, or letting myself be held back or even stopped, but like going into, okay, how can I treat this differently? What is the lesson that's to be learned here? Because there's always a lesson in everything, right? There's always a sense of love if you just open up and look for it. Love always comes through, and even though you're in a situation that feels like, where you're like maybe totally lost, there's still, if you focus on, if you're open to it, there is a way for love to come through and to really guide you to a better outcome, and to grow as a person, and to heal possibly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's such a key insight about life, again, I think it comes to what are you paying attention to? I think the word attention is underestimated or undermined, because energy follows attention, right? So if you don't give your energy to or your attention to something, it dies. There's no energy given to it. So it ceases to exist in a sense. And so what you pay attention to in those moments is kind of your power. You have the choice to pay attention to something in certain situations. And the beautiful thing about life is that if you really look for it, if you really understand this to be true, every experience, every moment, on the other side of it is a reflection of you. In other words, something for you to learn about yourself based on how you're feeling in that moment, based on what's coming up for you. Of course, this tends to be more clear when you're in relationships and you go through a breakup, or you go through, some form of grief or loss or something. Then it becomes very clear, because you feel intensity of emotion, and it's like, okay, there's some lessons here for you to learn so that you don't go through this pain again or something. Again, it's your attention. It's up to you to choose your attention to actually look at those things and face those things. Or do you remain victim, right? Or do you remain attentive to the parts of the lesson or the experience that are like more, but why? And the control and the self-sabotage and all of these things.
I'm thinking, well, yeah, like we talked about paradox before, and it's interesting with victim. It's like you're really focused on that. You don't want it to be this way, because but by being in victim mode, you're keeping it this way. You're not actively changing, trying to do anything.
Yeah. And, there's so many therapies and narratives around this, switch from victim to hero in your journey, and to me, that's like the journey of liberation, to really go from, yes, you were a victim to many things, but, and how are you going to choose to see those experiences that made you feel victim? Because I think, victimhood and all of the feelings that often come with that, these are pointing to, and as you said, behind every experience, there's some learning that's to be done. And these are all reflections of you. It's like, hey, you're interacting with some other human being, but things are waking up inside of you. And okay, you're feeling judgment, or you're feeling jealousy, or you're feeling anger or sadness, whatever it might be. And to me, these are gifts. If you trigger me, it's a thank you. Why? Because you're showing me, hey, this is where you're not free. I want to be more free, personally. And those triggers are, what keeps you in this, perhaps if you don't address them, in this victimhood, or it's what keeps you in these states of not love all the time. It kind of strips life away from you and brings fear and brings these other frequencies or emotions into you. And I think so much of the healing journey has to do with liberating yourself from these the victimhood mentality and the programming around it and the stories that you keep telling yourself that bring you deeper and deeper into the victimhood mentality. All of these things are also these triggers. I called them gifts because you're telling me where I need to pay attention. And okay, now I pay attention here. And what you find when you pay attention to all of the kind of the negative feelings of being unworthy, unloved, this is your child, right? And it's like, there are the feeling of unworthiness, of being unloved, of feeling unsafe, unvalidated, anything in that realm. It's when you look into those triggers, it's your child that's asking you to come back to yourself because you went outside of yourself to satisfy that love, safety, validation, acceptance. And I'm realizing in my own experience and through my therapy work, it's really self-love, as cliche as it is, but it's turning to those parts of myself, that child that's, calling me for these things and paying attention to it, him, and saying, hey, I'm here, I've got you. And even saying that, I feel this resonance in my body.
Yeah, me too. Beautiful.
Right? Yeah. I'm here, I've got you. Because that's what it wanted to hear, perhaps, when I was a child, And so that kind of starts to dissolve. So the healing is not an addition of things. It's a subtraction. Life is a game of subtraction. There's so much shit between you and what you think is all the way out there. And it's really a removal of these veils, of these stories, of these fears, of these unloved parts of yourself.
It's so interesting to me that like this whole life, it is being, I don't know if presented is the right word, but like early on in life, I'm not talking about childhood, but like, because I think then we're like in this very pure sense and it's like there's not a lot of conditioning yet, but like as we come into adulthood, there's overwhelmingly the sense of happiness and, the joy and the meaning of life is to be found out there. It's like in what you're achieving, it's in what you're doing, it's in, the title, the car, the house, the money, the people you surround yourself with. It's all that. And although people are maybe, it's very, when I'm talking about like the idea of status, but like obviously people are very important. And then it's actually the opposite. It's like you say, you're not adding things, you're subtracting things, and it's not about looking outside of yourself, but it's looking about inside. It's about stripping off the layers. It's unfolding yourself to find the pure being that's inside, the love.
So that's why, right? The logic or the behind the healing is so that you can come back to your sense of self, so that you can navigate from a place of authenticity, so you can really build that intimacy with your inner compass, your intuition, or the parts of you that guide you, because as you said, you have the fears and the things come into the mind. And so part of the reasoning behind, removing these, the stories, the conditioning. I don't know if you can remove conditioning, but you can perhaps recondition. Conditioning is just like part of how the mechanism of the human works.
Yes. Transform it, perhaps.
To
make it that you're looking at it in a different way.
In a different way, exactly. It's, to me, it's like it's glasses, right? Everybody has glasses, and there's shit on your glasses. Like, you got to clear your glasses, and see the world for what it really is. And so I think there's something that's standing out to me in my mind, which is we're talking about the healing, which is a fundamental aspect of coming back to love and coming back to relating to the world and to yourself in a healthier, more profound way. You mentioned the word meaning in what you just said. And I think there's another crisis. And this term is now starting to become a little bit popularized, but referred to as the meaning crisis. How we live in a world and where a lot of people kind of are so disconnected from themselves or their ultimate goals or their gods or whatever it might be, or their sense of purpose. And there is a lack of meaning. And it's not the question of what is the meaning of life. It's what is meaning in life? How do you find meaning in life? Meaning of life is for the philosophers for the next million years.
It's too big, but it's about how do I have this sense of meaning in the everyday things that I do?
Yeah. And meaning is a very powerful question. And I think, again, sometimes people will, use purpose in place of meaning. I think purpose is a dimension of meaning, but meaning has, I forget who, but somebody was speaking to meaning having the four dimensions, which are purpose, which is what is your overarching goal, coherence, which is how kind of well formulated or how much you've made sense of this overarching goal or how clearly you've defined the problem, the sense of coherence in your life, significance, meaning being connected to something greater than yourself, and mattering, which is the feeling of being connected. And, if the theory is like, if you can, if you have these elements or these dimensions of meaning figured out, you will have this sense of meaning. And meaning is not equal to like your subjective well-being. If I feel good because I have my cars and my house and it's not the same thing. But meaning is something that human beings, it's inherent in us. And if we don't pay attention to that question, you feel it. your soul wants to serve in a meaningful way. And there's a beautiful, and I would love to ask you these two questions, and maybe we can explore meaning in your life as well. The first question I'd love to ask you is, what would you want to exist in the world if you didn't?
Or can you reframe
In other
it?
words, yeah, like what do you want the world to have, or if you left Earth? What would, if you're looking at Earth from above and you're like, I wish for planet Earth, for humanity to have this or know this, or, you know, what would you want to see? And maybe it's a deep question because it does require reflection.
Yeah. I feel like what I feel like is really important that I see we really need more of is just this sense of connection. I feel like especially Western society has become so individualized, and we've all been taught to do it all alone and to be like, you know, to build your empire as a guy, or to be a boss babe as a woman, or like all these different things. But like, we actually need each other, and we're much more alike than we are different. And we're like this whole culture of like constantly trying to look for the differences, and everyone's like, you know, either you're left or you're right, or you're like accepting or you're racist, or you're like, you know, there's all these labels, and there seems to be this energy right now in the world where it's all about division, and everyone feels part of a group, and almost, I wouldn't say everyone, but like there's this sense of like a lot of people feel really alone, and they feel like other groups are against them. And I just really would love to have more people to have transform that into like, no, there's actually this connection, and there's this profound, deep truth to being human into life, that we're actually all mostly the same. We all want to be loved. We all want to be accepted. We all want to find peace within our hearts and have people around us that we can share life with, and you know, the whole spectrum of emotions and our full being. And you know, if you look at the mental health crisis, if you could call it that, and like how, you know, I think like something like 2/3 of marriages end up, you know, not just, you know, in divorce, and kids, you know, committing suicide, or like, you know, how many people are on pills and all that, especially I guess in the US, but also I think also in the Netherlands, like almost half of people are on some form of medication continuously. We're all like constantly dampening life. We're like, we feel attacked from the outside. We feel uncomfortable with ourselves, and our reaction is to dampen our body, to dampen our emotions, to dampen the symptoms that are actually there to tell us where we're not aligned, where we're not living in truth with who we really are. And it all, for me, stems from this idea of that we have this sense of not being connected and having to do it all alone, and having to sort of patch things instead of just really getting to the core, which is really scary. But if we know that we're being held by both the universe and love as a whole, but also by each other, then there's actually a lot more strength and ability to surrender to that process, because we know we don't have to do it alone. So that for me is just this sense of deep connection and trust in life and each other, and to really look at each other and seeing the thing that is the same instead of seeing the thing that is different. Even though the differences are also beautiful, but not to focus on them as the thing that defines us, or that is the reason why we cannot connect. And I was just brought back to this last year. I had this beautiful trip that was guided really well. And on the last day, we had this deep breathing session and just get tuning into our hearts and ourselves, and like what do you want the world to be like, kind of, and similar. And one thing that I felt was like, I'm really had this vision of a world where strangers would meet each other on the street as brothers. That we no longer walk past someone that is having a hard time, or someone that, a beggar on the streets, or because we recognize that that's someone that is very similar to us, that also just wants happiness and connection, and to recognize that it could also have been us that's there, or actually it is us that's there in a sense. And it's interesting because this was about a year ago, and at the time it felt like, oh, that's such a far away dream. But I've actually had moments like this already over the past year, like since, where it's like I just am in certain situations with a stranger where I feel like, oh, we're as brothers, we're the same, we're connected. And that's just what I wish for the world, to really focus on that and start seeing that and just leaning into that, because I think that's the way we can heal ourselves. And yeah, maybe it's too big to say we can heal the world, but like, I feel like the key is, it's there. But it's really about also letting go of these patterns and this these ideas are like, okay, if I give let's say I give money to someone that needs it, well, then I won't have enough, so I'm not doing that. Well, but what if you do it out of love, out of generosity, if you do it selflessly, and if you trust that it will come back to you in a different way, and that by giving, you're actually setting into motion this ever continuous process of sharing, and of how nature works as well. Nothing is ever disconnected. Nothing is ever alone. We're always doing it together. And it doesn't mean that if someone cannot give you something back, that you will not receive it in that sense, or in that way, or from that person. It will come back to you tenfold in a different way. And yeah, I hope that answers your question, at least.
It also answers the second part of the question, which is, how are you in service to the response of the first question? And what you shared is, you are in service to that. And you have a meaningful life, my friend.
Yeah, I feel that for sure. Yeah.
And I think that question comes from a professor, John Vervaeke, and it's just a kind of a short form version for you to reflect on. Okay, am I living a meaningful life? What would you, again, the questions are, what would you want for the world to exist if I didn't? And are you contributing to that? Are you serving to that? If you have the answer to the first one, then you're seeking what your service can be. If you don't have the answer to either of them, then you're in trouble, because you haven't, reflected really on what do you want? What do you want to see in the world,
Yeah, and it's in different things. So it's in like these small things and small gestures to strangers, absolutely. But it's also in like one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast is because I feel like I want to contribute more. I want to be more in service. And it is about like, the things that I've learned over the years, and being a filmmaker for 12, 13 years, having done hundreds of interviews, knowing the technicalities of all this, and then putting it into service for the world. Yeah. And giving people that are contributing to that, and that I know are, living from their hearts and in truth, to really give them a stage to have a bigger impact and create something more beautiful together. And not just do it for, have the job of filmmaking for financial gains for myself or our company or whatever, which is, you know, that's also needed. We all need to have an income, and that's also an interesting thing that for me I've reflected on a lot over the past year, was like, and I see that this a lot in, like, let's say, the spiritual community, of this idea that money is the root of all evil and money is bad. But then, no, actually it isn't. It's because there's people doing bad things with it doesn't mean that the thing itself is bad. A knife can be used to kill someone and to make the most delicious meal. It's all about the intention.
Yeah. Intention. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead, because I know you want to talk about intention.
A couple of things to pull out of there in the parking lot, which we'll come out to. One is from something you said way earlier about being held / having faith. I'm just naming them in my head so we can come back to them. I hope the mental health crisis. I'd love to come to that, especially for men and women, of course. But in our experience as men, I'd love to speak to that a little bit. And then I guess the last thing you said is intention. What was the last? Can you repeat your last sentence, if you remember it?
A knife can be used to kill someone or to make the most delicious, nutritious meal. It's all about intention.
Right. And it's about intention. Again, I come back to, it's about your relationship to money. Our good mutual friend Edu, really hit that message home for me. It's like, it's your relationship with money. As we said it earlier in our conversation, it's your relationship with whatever is on the other side of it. You yourself, or the concept of self for me, is your unique culmination of all the relationships that you have with the world, with yourself, with your molecule cells, food, everything is the summation, right? But that's just to say, yes, it is your intention. And of course, we live in a world where, and this is, I think, where a lot of us get stuck or almost give up really following our path, because it's the answer of how am I going to make money from this is not clear. How am I going to sustain myself? How am I going to scale? But who's doing this? But the thing that I'm doing is so niche. How am I going to, that's my thing, like I feel sometimes, this insecurity of like, but no one's going to, it's such a small market, or of people that are like, understand the value that I have that I want to bring.
But even if it's 1 in a million, there's 8,000 people that But even if there's 80, that might be enough. Even if it's
exactly, because it's depth. For me, what's important is the depth rather than the width. And I find that important. Is I wish to have deep impact rather than broad impact. Ideally both, of course, but sometimes I think has to be a trade-off at certain times. But in this, again, as you mentioned, like in the relationship that sometimes the people in the spiritual community might have this narrative around money is the source of evil or something. Again, I invite them to look at really what's your relationship there. What's that narrative from? Liberate yourself, because there's also this, I guess, again, challenge as a human is that we live in a world that so often feels disconnected from our nature, from humanity, from like a lot of things are messed up. A lot of things don't make sense. A lot of things are so out of alignment with nature, with our nature, with morality, with ethics, with what is conscious action in the world. And this really like can become paralyzing. And, like a lot of the world is trying to pull you in all of these really pull you away from yourself. Because when you are in yourself, you're in your power. Governments don't like that. School teachers don't like that. Parents don't like that. If we are powerful individuals, you think, But now I think the world is awakening to that reality, to that capacity in ourselves to really be individuals. But as how do you be an individual, an empowered individual that serves the collective, right? And so I think you're right. In the Western world, especially, you have very individualistic cultures, very competitive, a lot of narratives and dynamics in the society that emphasizes separation. And so, of course, we see the separation and the division as instinct almost now, rather than seeing the oneness. I say this, but I don't mean this. See the oneness, see the beauty in that, see the interconnectedness of all life. And the more people that can kind of really come into that understanding, I think it's actually such a beautiful way to live life, because for myself, I like to walk around, even in my own apartment by myself, as if everything around me is conscious.
Yeah.
Conscious of my presence, and I'm conscious of its presence. And the way I relate to that thing is fundamental. The quality of that experience is different. Whether it's your cup of coffee, you can make a cup of coffee a billion ways, right? But if you kind of imagine that coffee is conscious of your presence,
your intention,
at least for me, it brings out this loving nature in myself and this attentive, caring, committed nature. And in that nature, I feel something alive, something very pure and blissful, And so I think it's just a fun exercise to, wander and assume or imagine that everything around you is kind of conscious of your presence. Like,
yeah, I love
how
that.
would you react to it? How would you act? What would you do?
It's so interesting. And it's so like, years ago for me, this would have been so boo-boo. Yeah. But like, there's been so many like experiments from all kinds of different, people that show that this is actually true. Like that if you, put on classical music or like death metal, your plants will either, grow or wither. And if you have like, I listened to a podcast with Zach Bush recently, and he explained like there's actually now been an experiment done that where with certain instrument they can measure pretty much in real time the chemical like the compounds, the chemicals in the sap of a plant, and that when they had the owner of the house of the plants that they were like measuring go away for like an hour and come back about 2 kilometers from when the person was about 2 kilometers from the house, the chemical makeup of the plant would change. So the plants know you're coming home. Just as your dog would already, waggle its tail and run to the door when you're still like a couple of minutes away.
So what is that, right?
That is so
That's why I think,
beautiful.
Yeah. It's energy.
Yeah.
In a way that is what is the fabric of it all, and connects and speaks in ways that we can't always see, but we can have faith in it, I think it was really powerful, the thing you mentioned earlier about, coming back to our parking lot, of the feeling of being held. What came to my mind immediately is having faith, surrendering. And in the navigation of the complexity of life and trying to find comfort in the uncertainty and the unknowing and the infinity, you have to kind of rely on something. You have to turn to something, and that thing happens to be faith. Trust that life's got you. Like, really, life's got you. In the most miserable situations you would never imagine yourself to be, in the heartbreak and the loss, there's something those are lessons for you. Those are reflections for you to come back to yourself so that you can serve, right? And I forget the other thing, I guess, before we move into the mental health crisis, um, is there anything else that comes up for you that you want to share about?
Well, just as you shared this last bit, what really came up for me is that, like, in hardships, in moments of, sadness or despair, or like we feel maybe totally, out of control, when perhaps, your business has gone under, or you let go of your job, or a relationship is ending, and or you're sick, and like this sense of like, I just don't know what to do right now. And it feels like, why is this happening? Like, there's nothing positive about this. And for me, every single time, looking back to those moments, there was a beautiful, profound lesson. Now, it was 8 years ago now, I had a serious mountain bike accident where I hit a tree at a really high speed and like collapsed both my lungs. My spleen was ruptured, broke a couple of ribs, broke an arm. I was put into a coma right there, helied out into stayed in a coma, kept in a coma for 3 days, stayed in the hospital for 18 days. It was really heavy. And I don't really remember, I don't have memories of the accident or like the coma bit, but obviously directly after. And it was very emotional, especially for my parents. It took them 2 days to get there. It was like, in a different country. And looking back, I'm not sure, I don't know why it happened, but I do know what it taught me. It was like, at the time, I was always doing something. I was always running. I was always trying to, get the most out of life, but it wasn't really present. I was always trying to do more. And also having, I would say, being a little bit cocky, like just being, oh, look at how good I can ride a bike. And it was a couple of years after I stopped racing, and just really pushing myself beyond the limits of what I knew was for sure safe. And so I wasn't really being responsible. I was caring way too much about how it would look, what other people would think, and all this stuff. And I had a lot of beautiful people around me, but I wasn't really aware of how much they meant to me. And then, the first memory I had was like waking up in a hospital bed. It's like 4 or 5 doctors and nurses at the end of my bed, and they're like, "Hey, how you doing? You're probably wondering what happened. You've been here for 3.5 days. This and this and this has happened, but you'll be okay. You'll be ill for a while, but you'll be okay. Your parents are on their way." And I think maybe the first day I was just, with my parents, and I was obviously physically very weak. So like the next day I grabbed my phone, and it was like literally hundreds of messages from like pretty much, because I was there with 2 friends, and I think they and my sister posted something on my Facebook wall, and like through that, like, everyone got to know what happened, and it was all these prayers and all this love that was coming my way. And I was just completely overwhelmed, just crying because of all this love. And I realized how important those people are, and how beautiful it is that you're connected to so many people. And I wasn't really intentional about that up to that point, and that really changed something. And, of course, later other things as well, like breakups teaching me like where I was out of alignment with myself, or where I was like, treating someone not from the highest good, and like being maybe acting out of fear, or all these kinds of things. And like every hard moment ended up being a blessing and bringing me closer to myself, and closer to what's really important.
And that's why, life puts us in certain situations to help us see those things. And, unfortunately, sometimes it's tragic. It requires deep disruption in your psyche or your body for you to wake up. But you're waking up, and we live in a world that's trying to put you to sleep, and you have to try to stay awake, try to stay conscious, because it's really easy to slip into the unimportant things or to lose sight of the love and the important things that, are here to bring us back to love. And again, it to me just comes back to your willingness to look there, your willingness to actually take that lesson and see that lesson. And because everybody has a different tolerance as well of growth and of their timeline and their thresholds of breaking points. Some people go through 10 relationships, 10 breakups, but nothing changes, right? So their paradigm doesn't shift, their patterns don't break until something happens that's like highly consequential and directly impacts you. And so unfortunately, sometimes it takes, if you don't have the willingness and the understanding of, okay, really in every situation, what can I learn from this? Then you wait until tragic things happen, and then you have a wake-up call, and when it's too late, oh, I didn't tell my mom that I loved her, and now she's gone, and fuck, So this is why I say to myself on my whiteboard, I just have these reminders, because I go into the unconscious so often. I mean, 99, it's funny, it's a very precise number, but there was a study that I was reading that they published. 99.44% of us is basically unconscious. Wow. 99.44%. And we're speaking of how do you stay conscious? How do you make conscious choice? How do you do conscious love, act? And I think it's really important to, in whatever form that works for you, try to remember who you are, what you're valuing, what's important for you, and what you need to do to come into that feeling of your empowerment, of your power, of your love, of your feeling of generosity, of your compassion. Like, if you need to tattoo it, tattoo it. If you need a, whatever it might be. And I think that's why it's so powerful to in some of the Eastern world, or places where they pray, for example, 5 times a day, they're reminding themselves of the greater thing, and they're connecting themselves to the principles that it represents, which is love and trust and all of these things. And I think it's something that there's actually there's a author, Ian McKilchrist. He has probably like my Bible, which is called The Matter with Things. And he has an earlier book called The Master and His Emissary. And he offers a radically different understanding of the brain. And he speaks to, and the reason I bring this up is because there's 4 paths of knowing. There's science, reason, intuition, and imagination. And we live in a world now that has really privileged the science and reason. We're becoming very left hemisphered. Yeah. And we have this intuition and this imagination that's kind of dying out. We don't exercise it. In other words, we don't really we don't use our minds and our brains in its full capacity. Because again, these are in the realm of complexity. We don't really know intuition and imagination.
Yeah, they cannot be tested in school and given a grade.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So we're not really using the full capacity and the full power and gift and intelligence of what we are capable of. And so, especially in the Western world, it's all about the certainty, about the task in front of you, and, you know, the
Quantifying everything.
And again, kind of training more and more your brain to be in this more granular, specific, task-oriented kind of way of being. Now, that's a really practical, effective part of ourselves. But if it's disconnected to the other half of our brain, which is the right brain, this is where we think about context, and this is where we wonder, and this is where it's kind of our relationship to the more macro, to say the least, and to the uncertainty. We're missing that connection. And so instead we live in this very like macro defined world. And that comes at a really great cost, you know? And so we're fundamentally disconnected, not even in the world, but I think there's like a root cause here, which is, we don't kind of really exercise our imagination and our intuition. And in fact, these are the master. This is the emissary.
Yeah.
This, but this is driving right now.
Yeah. Your brain's a great servant, but a terrible master.
Yeah. And you need to like swap it around, And I think that comes back to like dealing with the uncertainty and so forth. It really roots in that. The left hemisphere wants the certainty. The right hemisphere is where it's curious. It explores the wonder and the awe and the infinite. And, the ideal is to be able to kind of balance the two, or to try to make sure that you have a relationship in the least.
I'm also thinking about what you told before, what you started off with, like with these emergence. It's like when you bring them together, there's actually room for something new and bigger and more beautiful to grow.
Exactly. So that's been something that I'm trying to bring into the work that I do, but also in my own life, is cultivating this sense of intuition and imagination. And again, there's hundreds of methods of how to do it, but it's around play and presence and tuning in and dialogue and creativity, because in that realm, you start to actually, use more of your mind. Thank you. Your mind and yourself. And I think it's a really unfortunate reality. And I think it's a predicament that we need to like more fundamentally understand as humans and as a humanity, of like, we are out of touch with our sense of the sacred, which is in that right hemisphere,
And how do you think we become more in touch? Like, how can we tune more into our right hemisphere and eventually make the bridge or the connection between the two?
Yeah, I think first, again, it's the awareness of it. But I think you can actually tap into it quite easily, again, through like playing, through, imagination. I mean, it's like, art. Art is a beautiful version of that. Creativity is a beautiful version of that. Reading, the things that you engage in might look different for you, but that really bring you in these different states of mind and different states of being that bring you into this sense of wonder and the sense of awe and the sense of beauty and the sense of your relationship with something bigger and greater. And then coming back down to, okay, maybe now you have to engage the other part of your brain to actually take action on something. So it's really just redefining our understanding of how our brain works. And for me, it's helped me realize, okay, I actually want my full brain to be in service to me. Like I was living in the US for several years. I felt like I was being in a way, pushed and conditioned to really just privilege the science and reason, and the numbers and the so on and so forth. but there was like no life in that for me. I was in tune with something, with my more playful side, with my more intuitive side. And I think there is wisdom and intelligence if we want to solve the problem. If we want to solve complex problems, you need the fullness of your brain, in other words. And our intuition and our imagination, they have an intelligence that is required.
It's also, if you look at inventions, right? All the disruptive and big inventions have never been made because people looked at more numbers, but it's because someone was able to make connections that no one was previously able to make. It was because you're overlaying a complex structure onto something else. It's because you're looking at it from a completely different angle, because you're like playing with it and trying to figure out. For me also, what resonates really is like it's trying to see if you can tap into something that doesn't have a goal, but where the only goal is doing it.
Exactly.
But you're just doing it for the fun of it. And you're like back into like this inner child, into this playfulness. And that at some point, something else will emerge. Like there was also for me, like into like, I went to university and I really felt like this is all like only head, and this is way too rigid. And I just want to go into like be more creative. And it's when I started being a filmmaker, and then at some point, obviously the other hemisphere has to come back into like, okay, how do I actually structure a company, and how do I make sure that I can pay for the bills, and all this stuff. Do I pick a niche and whatever? But then don't lose that other part. Yeah,
I think, and you are an inspiration to me in that sense, and I'm proud of you for being able to find a way to balance that, because we need more examples of, hey, we can actually build this bridge, right? You can actually follow your passion and your curiosity and your creativity and your radical thinking and innovation and dream with a practicality, which is to live in this world and participate in this economy and so forth. And I think actually now the world is changing a lot, and throughout history, there was less of that. There were small communities or bubbles of artists and poets and so forth. Now with AI coming in, there's in theory an opportunity to allow people to move more into that creative realm, to do more human things rather than inhuman things that a lot of humans are currently doing.
The mechanistic, robotic,
repetitive. So, sometimes this for me, this argument of AI is stealing our jobs, for certain jobs, that's good, because you're doing something inhumane by definition.
Yes.
Go be human.
And it's uncomfortable because if you're one of those people that, your job is being taken away by AI soon, or already has happened, you're like in no man's land for a while. You've done this one thing. This is what you know. This is what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And now it's up to you to figure out life in a new way, figure out yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's a lot of freedom in that.
But fear
also.
And so this, I think we're moving towards what can be called a meaning economy, especially with AI now, that the rate that it's taken on, and with people waking up, more and more people waking up, especially after COVID, having the residual effect of shit. Things are fragile. Came so close to death. I now know what's important, or having the time and space to explore things and try new things. I really think there is an opportunity now, and with a lot more of the spiritual practices and coaches and yoga and all of these things, modalities, there's like an economy that's building around it. And I think in the future, for the people that might have lost their jobs to AI or whatever that would look like, how do you onboard them or off-ramp them from that previous world and onboard them into this new world where they might not know, how to be creative, or how to play with their imagination, or how to not do something that's so robotic or monotonous.
It's interesting because there's, of course, this part of like, having examples that people can look to.
Yeah.
But there's perhaps also this part of, can we in some way, I don't know, maybe now I'm becoming too specific, but like incentivize, like let's say you're a big company and you're like, you know, having I don't know, 1,000 people working in a big warehouse, and that's all going to be robots. How can, okay, so that means you're doing that because you're going to make more money in the future because you don't have the costs and, you know, people getting sick and all this
As
stuff.
a business, yeah.
So is there a way to incentivize a company like this to, you know, take care of those people on their way out, not just by giving them a little bit of money, but like, can we bring more like great creativity and like for somehow make them tap into that other side of the brain to figure out life on their own without feeling alone?
I think that's the opportunity that's looming and predictive, you know. And there will be a stage of, a lot of people moving into perhaps this uncertainty of everything that I knew or spent the last 20 years studying or doing or spending money on. How do I make sense of that? And I think that's why actually there's just a big opportunity to help people in that transition period, and to also, again, not see, I understand why there's like fear around AI and so on and so forth. Again, just try to remove the fear. Try to find a relationship that serves you. If it doesn't, fine. You don't have to, be in love with it or believe it or accept it necessarily, but just liberate yourself from the things that strip life away from you,
Wow, that's liberate yourself from the things that strip life.
Yeah.
Move more into the things that give you more life and give you more a sense of being human.
Yeah, I mean, life seeks life. So it's kind of automatically happening, but you're blocking it.
Yeah.
Right. Again, if you notice the things you're drawn to, tends to be life things, living things, conscious things that give you a sense of life, nature, connection, or, and so, don't be afraid, or have faith and trust to move with the thing that makes you feel excitement and passionate. That is your higher mind translating itself in your body. It's not there for no reason. You are an individual, and out of the quadrillion, I don't know, the biggest number, out of the infinite things that can happen to you, for whatever reason, you've tuned into and narrowed your what is relevant to you to particular things, for reasons that are because the conditions of your upbringing or your circumstances, but some of it is also your soul, saying there are certain things that are relevant to you, and I'm ignoring a lot of possibilities for a purpose. For some reason you watch a YouTube video, a movie, or a relationship, and you resonate with different parts of it. You and I can watch something but have complete different interpretations. There's significance to that. You chose to ignore a lot of things and have a realization or a relevance narrow down onto some element or some quality because there's something there for you.
And it's maybe not, like you say, chose, but it's maybe not. Part of it is you actively choosing, and part of it feels like subconscious, but that's maybe the higher self choosing, or like some other frequency or dimension of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe so. I mean, I used to take goosebumps for granted. I didn't realize it's like, oh, something made me feel something. But goosebumps, I now notice when I get goosebumps, it's in moments of profoundness. It's in moments of extreme bliss or extreme resonance. And so in those moments is when something in my higher mind is signaling to myself something. Again, it's saying, hey, look here, pay attention.
Mm.
And so today after the podcast, I've logged the couple of times that I felt goosebumps, and I'm going to go back and explore why. What was behind that? What was the message there that made me feel so strongly? Because obviously I'm in alignment with something there. You know, something is purposeful and trying to message itself through my body.
I love that. And I think like that's, if you can tune into that, you start to really, well, coming back to this idea of being held, being carried, like that, there's infinite ways of messages coming through to help you, guide you into what is the direction for you to go, and for your life to unfold in its, you know, its most beautiful way, or its biggest way. Yeah.
And again, you don't know what that's going to look like. You can't control it. It's a combination of, having faith and following, and having the willingness to follow and the openness to follow and the courage to follow what's, what speaks to you, and where you feel, again, where are you feeling pulled? Where are you feeling drawn to?
Was there for you a specific moment where you, what happened where you decided like, okay, now I'm really letting myself be guided by this force. I'm now starting to go from right hemisphere to left hemisphere.
To be honest, I think, and maybe most of us have had this, I started to feel into this. I literally thought it was magic when I was like much younger. I would remember even playing games with myself of like predicting, like driving in the car and trying to predict, like, what's the next billboard I'm going to see, or like, I don't know, just like playing games and being very in tune with this other world, other dimension. And then to be honest, again, like, I think I lost touch with that for a while because I was distracted and I was just in life, going through school and going through becoming, and thinking like, what the fuck? And then my reconnection to it. Yeah, I mean, I think it started in university. For me, it's been like heartbreak mostly has been like the door for me to go into it. And yeah, I would say a series of, not a series, one heartbreak in particular, that of course makes you deeply reflect and open the doors to self-understanding. And in that process of self-understanding, realizing there are these mechanisms, reconnecting with these mechanisms to help you come out of that darkness, right? To help you be okay and make sense of things. And you reach a point where you need to put your faith into something when you can't make sense of anything, when you can't remind yourself the whiteboard, what I wrote on the whiteboard isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody help, And I never used to ask for help. I still struggle to ask for help, but it's an interesting thing. But I think for me, I've like, in a way, uniquely always been very much a critical thinker, very much always trying to invite, but what if this? and like seeing the complexity of things. I really struggle with like standardized testing because I feel like I can challenge the multiple choice, you know. It's like, what's the best answer? It's like, well,
yeah, none of them are really it. Yeah.
Like, have you considered this angle or this lens, or like, what are these variables there? And so, and it's a blessing and a curse, you know. Sometimes like it's overwhelming to be in my brain and in my heart, because I'm highly sensitive, and that really is a gift at the same as well. And I see it more as a gift. But there's times where, of course, if you have a open and sensitive heart, then you're also more exposed to the pain and to you know, anything that could disturb that. So I would say, yeah, for me, I can't recall a specific moment where I was like, okay, this is my intuition. But yeah, I would say only like 4 or 5 years ago, I started to really like try to understand the science of intuition and start to try to understand why some people have stronger intuition and worse intuition. And I was working on a project that was trying to understand this one individual's intuition so that we could actually try to scale it. Because there's this one individual that had this unique ability, this unique intuition to solve a unique type of problem. And we wanted to try to understand how his intuition works, why, what are the cues that he looks for, so that we could try to build a model and teach it to others, teach intuition to others. Again, because intuition holds this intelligence or hold this capacity that's like, yeah, really powerful, really effective. Comes with time, comes with experience, comes with intention. Certain doctors can walk into a room and look at you and notice something, whereas somebody less experienced can come and they don't see it. So it was an interesting kind of time period of studying intuition in that way. Anyways,
I like what you said about scaling one person's thing to, I guess, a business, or like it makes me think of like, we all try to, especially as an entrepreneur, and I also see this, maybe I'm in a bubble, but I still see more and more people making the shift from employee to entrepreneur. And I guess the whole AI thing is only going to help that transition more and more, to see that if you're building a business, you don't have to figure something out from scratch and be super externally focused on like, what does the market need, but go more into this mindset of, well, I'm unique. I'm already having a certain purpose and meaning in this life and in this society. If you're connected to, all these parts of intelligence and all these parts of yourself, how can you then scale who you are to turn that into your business, instead of trying to figure out something that is new, that is maybe not even connected to who you are in the fullest?
It's a fantastic question, and I'd love to see, through your podcasts. And I think it's something that's emerging, because in this new economy or way of working, we're still figuring out what that looks like. Right now, scaling is through the social medias, but I think there's a lot of room for creativity and innovating on the old paradigms of scaling or means of scaling, but there are certain realities there are certain technologies that allow you to reach 1 million people that otherwise you can't, so I think it's important for you to understand, like, what is it that you're scaling? Why is it that you're scaling? Are you scaling for the sake of scaling? I think most people, yeah, right? Because scaling is attributed to profit.
What is it that you really need? Do you know what you really need? And that's also something really interesting, is like, how does that whole process of then scaling bring about change in your life? And is it actually the change that you seek to have? Which is something that I realized when I, a couple of years ago, started an online business, and I at some point found myself only being on social media and creating, ads and all this kind of stuff to get the attention of people, where actually I was I was, doing this completely repetitive thing, and I was, looking at numbers and all this kind of stuff, and it was actually taking me away from creating and being creative and making, being connected to people and having an impact, which was the whole reason I started doing it. So it's I don't know where I want to go, but like this is just a very interesting thing to me of like, try to keep in mind of like what it is that you really want in your life, and keep that as an anchor, as a reflection or a whiteboard thing of like checking in every now and then, like, is this still what I'm doing?
Checking in. Exactly. And this is, again, I think we need less meaningless things in the world. We need more meaningful things in the world. So some things, we need to figure out how to scale, because they're going to impact many people in positive ways. Of course, and this is, my work now has a lot to do with conscious business and conscious strategy and conscious innovation. What I mean by conscious business is to actually bring in these other forms of intelligence and to find this synergy between nature, humanity, human, and consciousness. It's like, that's this ideal business in my world, of like, okay, what does a conscious business look like? What are we, that requires a complete different paradigm of business, of competition, of scale, of how I think about it is quite different, but it still has to operate in the world and the economy as it is today, right? So how do you find that balance of trying to stay in integrity to your values as a business and still participate in the economy and the incentive systems and so on and so forth? It's a great question, and I'm curious to see, what we find out about it and how we scale. But I think I might not be the expert in this, but I think, again, the reality is that these businesses, these institutions, they are highly influential and they hold a lot of power, and they are very well coordinated, meaning they can implement things at scale quite quickly. But those things won't take off if we, if we change our value systems, for example, if we don't find meaning in those things. Like, we also, it's the agent in the arena, and they shape both. Me as an individual, my modeling shapes the world modeling, and the world modeling shapes my modeling, And right now, this is a little bit out of balance. The world is shaping us in ways that's like, we're actually not modeled in ways that is always, in our highest, most loving self.
Yes.
So what would an economy, what would a world, a community look like if it was more representative and coherent to this higher version of ourselves, At the level of global, I don't know how that works. It's a very local level.
Yeah, but maybe it also starts with ourselves. Like, we have a lot more power than we've been made to believe. Like, if like, you can vote with your wallet. Like, if you don't spend your money in certain companies in certain places, and you're at some point that if everyone does that, that business will become obsolete. Yeah. And like, and this goes for many ways. Like, how do you live your life? What do you put your intention into? What do you put your attention onto? Yeah.
Can I say one? Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just like, there's so much that we can actually do ourselves, and even though the world is outside of us is constantly, it's not forcing us to do anything, I think, but it is pushing us into certain directions. And I'm curious to hear from you as well. Like, how do you? And you came up with this question, but like, how do you find peace? How do you come back to peace in a world that's trying to disturb it?
And
peace and perhaps alignment, or whatever you want to.
Yeah. And I will acknowledge it's a complex question, but it's quite simple. again, the world is a reflection of us, you know, and I think it does start, as cliche as it is, like it comes back to peace within ourselves, because that's what we project and can mirror, right? How we are, our internal state is what we project into the world. And so it does start from a place from the internal, that we then start to mirror. And it's so common to have organizations, for example, that, want to bring peace or social good into the world. And on their website, our values and principles, our mission, but they don't rehearse that internal to themselves. There's no peace internal, but you're projecting peace, and there is a mismatch there, and that eventually catches up. So it's a question of integrity, I think, as well. And to bring peace to the world, I mean, I don't know. I feel a little bit disenchanted around that question at the moment, to be honest, because it's a process, right? And now, if I put my biomimicry hat on, what would nature do? What would nature say? How would nature come to peace? It would say that it's about cycles, right? Nature has cycles, that peace is an emergent process and actually collapses and reemerges and collapses. But, well, in certain ways, but of course, like, healthy ecosystems are at peace when they are in balance and when they're in harmony, and there aren't external forces that are coming and, disturbing the food chain or so forth. So I would just say, again, this is for me where I would say I would look to nature. And if you look at the most lush ecosystems, the most diverse and robust ecosystems, natural ecosystems, in a way they're at peace. But it depends how we define peace and how we talk about it. It's like, really, is it peace we're looking for, or
acceptance of what is? Peace doesn't mean that nothing is happening.
Yeah, and I used to even think like peace is the absence of violence. Yeah, ideally, like in our world, we remove the need for violence, or the interpretation for the need for violence. And as you said, like, that we just feel connection and interconnectedness, and we are conscious, and we don't bring more conflict, into the world, and our lives, and our relationships with ourselves, our friends, our animals, our lands. Yeah, I'm curious to explore that question. I mean, it's interesting because, I was working at a peace building incubator, and we were developing programs to address peace at the root of armed conflict, and in several very fragile places around the world. And in certain ways, we were, checking the box of, we're doing good work. We're planting the seeds for peace to prosper. But then violence in the country or in that ecosystem would increase. And all of a sudden, what we were trying to do might have collapsed or been challenged. And so, I think it's important to understand what we mean when we talk about peace and how we're measuring it. But I think fundamentally, it's this idea of, in ourselves, in our micro levels, individuals, our groups, our communities, our organizations, to mimic and mirror what it is that we want to see in the world, to really have the integrity and to stand in truth with what you're saying on your websites and your mission statements and your values. And it's very often that's not represented within the people of the organization. And so that's one thing that my work is also trying to tap into, is to try to start to make organizations really tap into and feel more in integrity and more as a living ecosystem, you know, and what does it mean for you to thrive and for you to embrace the complexity and the you know, the things that can make you survive in this world.
I also what comes up for me a lot is also like just being honest, because like you know all this bullshit marketing and this greenwashing and all this stuff where like you know all these companies have very similar messages and empty promises and things that are completely you know off track with what they're saying, what they're doing, and what they're actually doing. And let alone, and like you said, like all the people in the company actually living that as well, which is even the next step. But
yeah, I mean, this is the thing that we really need to invite innovation or new paradigms of how to, you know, operate and innovate in a way that aligns more with these principles of life.
I do also feel like there is this change happening where it's becoming harder and harder for companies to say things that aren't true, because we notice
because there's more.
There's not just there's this more. I think we're as humanity we're becoming more in tune with our intuition and with our deeper sense of you know feeling and all this stuff. And then there's also you know this whole democracy of information through social media, where like if someone gets called out, like you know through like if the right person retweets it or whatever, like the next day there's 20 million people that know it.
So the markets respond, you know, like, so what is the intention of why they are advertising green, you know, or sustainability? Of course, again, a lot of organizations, companies are, you know, take that seriously to an extent. But yeah, I mean, nowadays, if you don't, or if you say something that goes against the existing narrative, it shows on your, you know, your stock ticker.
Yeah, but it's also like, because now everyone says sustainable, then it doesn't really mean anything anymore.
But exactly. So there's a loss of meaning. Again, it's not just meaning about life, it's meaning about these words, right? They've been stripped of their essence. And so sustainability, in the realm of complexity, what does sustainability mean? And what does thinking long-term genuinely, you say it, but then you have, you know, annual metrics where you're optimizing your entire foundation or organization or company to meet 10 metrics.
Yeah, and often it's the quarterly revenue or
and it's a quarterly revenue, profit, whatever. And now, of course, there's some organizations and companies are, you know, adding metrics to be more holistic, but it's not truly holistic. And it's very difficult to be truly holistic and very costly.
But it's more honest.
It's more honest, and transparency. And again, it's hard. And I think this is exactly where there's opportunity to kind of change some of the frameworks and incentive systems and valuations, right? Because, you know, companies, when they optimize for 10 metrics, right? In a complex world, what happens is you are doing green on these 10 metrics, but most likely you're externalizing harm elsewhere in the ecosystem. But you have no idea about it because you're not measuring it. You're not monitoring those things because you're monitoring for success. You don't always have the mechanisms to monitor for failure and adapt. So adaptive business is part of being a conscious business, is truly embracing mechanisms, processes, tools, budgets that allow you to be adaptive to what you're learning on a continuous basis, to see, okay, we're putting this thing out into the world. And again, this is in alignment with the principles of complexity, because one of the properties of it is fractal conception, meaning like an emergence, right? So you put something out into the world and like it'll start to have these ripple effects. And you can't see all of the effect, right? You can't see all the second, third order effects, but you can at least try to be a little bit more conscious in the unfolding of the thing. I say that, but I don't know if that's true or possible or even wise to do. But part of me wants to, be able to capture and be more sensitive and aware of what's unfolding and how we're affecting the world. Again, you have companies like social media, Facebook. Our intention is to connect people, right?
But it's also like disconnecting people.
But it unfolded in ways, it interacted. We had this great technology, interacted with the current human condition. And then, certain problems emerged from that, but also certain powers emerged from it as well. And so I don't know if we can say we can always like control and direct things towards a positive emergence or, but I think what it comes back to, okay, there are these properties that are important for us to really understand and harness and leverage. Again, around emergence, around fractal conception, around self-organization, because they have these like inherent powers to them, right? You're like playing with the game of life that has this force, you see it in nature, like, and then you thrive. Nature has all of the characteristics that a business wishes to have: resilience, adaptability, anti-fragility, sustainability, adaptiveness, all of it.
Yeah.
So it's ironic to me that we don't look so much to nature, because nature has done 3.8 billion years of R&D. But we don't ask the question. So it's interesting to me that we don't mimic it. And I think this is part of what I want to bring into my work more seriously is, this notion of let's ask nature, what would nature do? What would nature do? What would love do? Right?
Yeah. And I like bringing it back to the more personal, what can I do?
Yeah. We went for 20 minutes there. We went somewhere that it was also challenged me, because it's something I'm still very much learning about, but I'm grateful that we went there, because we have to connect that.
Exactly.
Right?
And I love it, because it is also good. It's really important to see the bigger picture and to see the potential of where we can take it on the bigger scale.
Yeah.
And I think then in the end, it's also like coming down where it's starting with like, what can I do? And like what coming from the sense of what would love do? And I really, when I'm in a certain situation where I feel like there's tension or that could potentially turn into a conflict, and there's like, I have this certain needs or I have this certain like outcome that I prefer. And then that other person has an outcome that they prefer that is not aligned. There's this different. You have different, needs and different things. And then there's a third one that we often overlook, which is like, what would love do? What if I go into love, then what can emerge there? And it doesn't mean that I completely, sort of push away my own needs, because love is about like, completely sort of surrendering and let giving everything to the other. It's not what it is, but it's more about like reframing it, stepping away and seeing the bigger picture. And like, is there actually something that's being called of me to be a better version of myself that is not about fulfilling this perhaps egoic need, but about like, what can I bring of myself that is contributing to the whole, to the situation, to this relationship, to this other person.
And that, again, is something to cultivate. And I think the way you phrase it there just made me really think about part of the essence of the masculine is your ability to sense and respond based on what's needed in that situation from a place of open heart, right? And
you wanted to go into the mental health for a bit as well.
Maybe we can just tap into it. And we've kind of jumped around, but there is an underlying thread to me, and I think we've beautifully kind of playfully jumped around to the business, to complexity, to childhood trauma and self-love and scaling, which I think also, just a side note, I think nature has a lot of answers to the question of scaling. But I guess, do we want to go here for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess this has to do with, and something I'll come back to that you said much earlier on when you first brought up the mental health crisis. And I think you specifically spoke about men in that. And again, us being disconnected from ourselves, from our sense of love, from, especially for men, like there is a strong narrative around. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, well, not to not acknowledge that this is also, of course, happening for women. But like, if you look at
absolutely.
if you look at numbers, like in the extreme, about 2/3 of suicides is men.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's more in the West, in the culture, that men have this, like the vast majority of men have this sense of I'm alone in this. I have to do it alone. I have to figure it out. I cannot share, my fears and the shame and the losses. I can only share the wins. And I feel like for women throughout history, this sense of being there for each other and like has stayed intact a little bit more. Like, let's say a couple breaks up, and the woman will go to her girlfriends, the guy will go to booze, some, right? It's like, and it's obviously just generalized and it doesn't apply to everyone, but it's I feel like, and obviously we can also tap into more of this because we're guys. Like,
and it's, there is a lot of issue areas within this, and I think from a man's point of view and experience, like, we have, I speak to so many women that, and I see this so like sadly, and it really like, hurts me to hear how unsafe women feel, and because men really have maybe not the tools or resources or whatever. There's various things of them not having healed their unloved parts of themselves that turn into, and being really programmed by certain narratives of what it means to be a man. That for me, honestly, like I've in a certain way, I've been kind of conscious of that through most of my life. Even though I'm bothered by it and kind of pulled and to a certain extent, some of the parts of the narrative I understand, but like we really owe it to society and to our women counterparts to heal and to, unmask and to really take accountability and ownership over the parts of ourselves that make, whether it's women or other men, feel unsafe or unloved. How do we come back to us being sources or people that, where other people, whoever's reciprocal to us, can feel safety, love, cherished, seen, heard, so that our ego and our defense mechanisms are not what the first thing that comes up. I'm even guilty of this. Now I'm much more conscious of it and how to communicate.
Yeah, to speak. I just, like the last podcast with Aaron, we were talking about this a little bit as well, like to communicate about your emotions instead of from your emotion.
Yeah, exactly.
To acknowledge like, oh, there's this fear here, or there's this anger, instead of being angry at the other person.
Yeah. So that's one thing, the skill of communication. Communication is so core to everything we've talked about, right? We've kind of taken it as an assumption that we know how to communicate love and ideas and all of these things. But yeah, how we communicate is a skill and not something that we're taught. You know, we look at our parents or our fathers as examples, and I don't think there aren't many skillful, you know, communicators. At least, you know, I've recently, I would say, been exposed to like much more skillful communication around how to talk about what's coming up for me, my feelings, taking ownership over my feelings, and listening. Like, what does it mean to truly listen and understand? Love is about approaching with curiosity, not with judgment or with your fear. Love and curiosity are in the same frequency, you know? And so for me, that's just this remembering, again, when I go into certain conversations, when I notice that I'm tensing up and I'm feeling a judgment come up or a fear come up or sadness come up, yeah, I just try to just come back to like my principles of communication and how to be and what to be aware of in these moments. And for men, I mean, there's a scientific basis to this as well, because in estrogen in women, estrogen correlates to your sense of emotions and intensity of emotions and your ability to articulate them. Men have testosterone, right? So women biologically have an heightened capacity to feel and articulate emotion.
Yes.
And that's why 70% of people that are in therapy are women, right? So because men...
Not because they don't need it, but because they notice.
They are able to articulate it. And most therapy is on the basis of verbal communication. So for men that have a hard time expressing and articulating, that doesn't work for me to sit down in a therapist, for example, you know? But it's a skill that we need to be cultivating very consciously. And, you know, the men's work that I do and that you do as well, like for me, this is a big part of why I'm there, is to really become a more skillful communicator when things show up, when my humanness shows up. And it's not about suppressing my humanness. It's about being in integrity with my humanness and communicating it with compassion. And it's beautiful that how it's actually received, because what the women that I've related to, including my mom, my sister, and so forth, that's really all they're wanting. You know, like they open their hearts when you can stand in acknowledgement, when you can stand in your integrity, when you can stand in, a compassionate delivery of what it is that you're feeling and why, instead of saying, no, but you hurt me. And, you know, like these are things that really need to, us men need to take responsibility over, because it's scaring women, it's closing people, not only women, it's people, other men. Like, why can't men have affectionate, loving relationships with each other? I feel so fortunate that I'm able to have that in my life. And I want that for all the guys that I see, like truly. But there's parts of them that, you know.
Yeah, there's judgment, there's shame, there's fear, there's like blame, perhaps. There's all these different, like heavy emotions and connotations to it.
Yeah. So I'm so glad to be, you know, exposed and to this work and this community. And it's really helped me tremendously in my own, sense of being and what integrity even means. You know, it's like it's really helped me understand and come back to integrity. And for me, integrity is love, right? What would love do? It would be in integrity being a sense of clear, you know? And from that sense of clear, you operate most authentically. And it's actually quite funny when you look around and you realize how much inauthentic relating happens because of social norms, or because you have to impress somebody or show up in a certain way, or you don't feel safe. So you have to act and be performative in your relationship with whoever. But being able to, what we really want to get to is authentically relating with people. That's really the only time that you can really assess the quality of your relationship, you know, or the truth in your relationship, especially if you're going on a date with somebody. Of course, at the beginning, you know, you are, as a guy, you show up in a certain way to try to impress. You don't show up in your rawness. You don't show up in your vulnerability, raw, you know, because it makes you look unstable or
perhaps, and you might also still feel unsafe for doing that.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it goes both ways. You know, this feeling of safety is really all we want as well. We want to feel safe. So, but that's the thing. We have to offer that as well, you know, the thing that we're wanting.
Yeah, and I do feel like it is up to us, and that perhaps points to men, because I feel like, you know, the masculine energy is the groundedness, is the container, is the holder of space, of energy. And if that safety isn't there, then there's no place for the woman to open her heart. Exactly. So in that sense, there is, for the men, we have to take the first step. Yeah. But it's also like just an invitation for everyone to see, like, where can I already act now? Can I, let's say, lead by example? Yeah.
It's about, like opening your heart. And when somebody feels safe, they will open theirs, you know, because otherwise, and again, it's a human mechanism to put up walls and boundaries and fear of opening up, because there's risk for pain, of course. Yes. You know, and until they feel safe, they won't open up, whoever it is, man or woman. But I don't know, I've in my experience, at least lately, like this is really an important thing for me, is to offer spaces where people feel safe and loved and cherished and seen and heard, period. And beautiful things emerge from that. Humanness emerges from that. And now I'm in true, authentic connection with somebody and can feel depth of love and that I haven't felt before, you know? And it's the masculine and the feminine, these polarities really finding, like, revealing their greatest gifts when they work in harmony together, you know? And unfortunately, a lot of the culture has, pushed, you know, the men to be more masculine, the feminine to be more feminine, or to take on masculinity within themselves or something like this. And I think that's, I understand that, or not fully, but I sympathize and I have compassion for that. But I really wish for us to find a way to come and experience these polarities. And I think the masculine, feminine, these are just energetic signatures. They're not gendered necessarily. It just happens that certain people, women, have more feminine qualities, and
generally there's like speaking, some cases where it's the other way around, and that's also okay. And like, for example, in like romantic relationships, that will work totally fine if you find someone that balances out your amounts of masculine and feminine within yourself.
Exactly. But again, you go back to our first thing of emergence or relationships, and how are you relating to the person across from you? Like, what is the basis of your relationship with them, you know? And I don't know, it's for me also, as a, you know, when you're a younger boy, we long for intimacy. But the only way we know how to do intimacy is like to have sex. And So oftentimes that becomes, I still witness it around me, of like this projection of like just rushing to sex because you want to feel intimacy. But once you, at least for myself, have learned that there are so many ways to experience intimacy of connection that's completely non-sexual, you know, but that's what we knew. That's what I knew, or for example. But I'm really witnessing the power and the gift of when the masculine and the feminine energies can come together in harmony. And so it's important for me then to really understand the essence of the masculine if I'm going to be relating with somebody that holds the essence of the feminine. And what does that mean in my role to open up the expression of the feminine? And you start to naturally see this magic, really feels like magic, happen.
Yes.
And I used to be blind to this in many ways.
Yeah, same. You have to be awakened to it at some point.
Yeah.
And if you can really start to tap into that and obviously have a conscious partner that's conscious of this as well, then you go back into this emergence of like you're both like sinking more and more into this part of yourself, and with that comes a deeper and deeper connection and a form of energy between you that becomes bigger and bigger.
Exactly. And it's a reciprocal opening that happens, meaning him or her opening results in a deepening of my opening and vice versa. And so then you really, and for me, I really long for this. I really value that deep form of relating. I'm not so good at the surface of, whatever people talk about sometimes. Like, I like to go deep and feel a connection with somebody. And because I feel really alive there, and I feel I'm actually honoring what my soul is here to do in those experiences, And you can find depth and you can find the connection if you really, tap into some of these tools and ways of communicating and ways of listening. Sometimes it really is just a hand on the thing and saying, I'm here, I got you, whether it's to yourself or to somebody else. And to be present. Presence is the greatest gift, and to listen and to, love, that's love. So what would love do is it would be present,
So beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here, Idan, and going on this journey. And can you please let people know where they can find out more about you, where they can contact you, and if there's anything else you want to share, or do want to open the space now?
Let me think about any last comments before. I mean, there's so many doors that opened in my mind that I didn't follow because we had other things to talk about. But
you need to come back.
I hope to come back and go a little bit deeper into some of these explorations. And talking to you, it's a process to start to really find insights that are unique to us two. And I think every group of people or individuals, there's something between us two that is to be found. I believe that, whether it's a lesson or an insight or whatever. So I'm curious to continue the conversation at some point. I mean, I think a lot was said. I do, the invitation to ask yourself, what would love do? To choose the things that you feel drawn to approach life with openness, with trust, with compassion. I know these are cliche things, but they really stand true,
and they're also like, it's always possible to do more of it.
yeah, I mean, this is,
There's always things to be learned.
again, yeah, the universe is the scale, right? That was the initial love story. And so it's quite limitless what it can do. And I think it'll really, most of the questions that I think people have about life, about their work, about their relationships can really come back to, following their heart, following the things that they're passionate about, and not being tied to the outcomes of things, which is a tough thing to do. It's a paradox of having desires but non-attachment, like, and I hope that more and more communities open and become available to people, and tools and resources become accessible to people to help them remember, right, the essence of who they are, and for them to find out more about, who they are, and being comfortable with that and liberating themselves from that, so that they can come to this, version of a more loving, compassionate, empowered, inspiring individual, that, is here to serve something greater. And that's a fact. It's not something you have to believe in. Like, you're here to do something. Yeah. And I want to help inspire people to see that and do what they need, hold them accountable in ways that, will help them do that. So I'm just feeling a lot of gratitude in my heart. Noticing lots of ideas and things on my mind for next time. So we'll parking lot those. And in terms of where people can find me, I mean, the theconsciouscode.co, that's the website, my website. And, I'm still exploring and trying to like put myself out there more in terms of the social medias and so forth. So for now, Idan Shahidi on Instagram, Idan.Shahidi on Instagram. But I would love to connect with people, and I'm in this playground stage. I really am treating life and work as like a playground right now, and seeing what emerges, and really moving with the flow of connecting with people that make me feel excited. And so that's why you see me right now in these several different projects that aren't really connected and, on paper, but they really all excite me. And I think there is like something to emerge from that. So, I
love that. Big inspiration. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Lars.
Yeah. And I hope this, for everyone listening, watching, I hope this has touched your heart in many ways and inspired you to live a life of love a little bit more than you were up to now. And excited to see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching or listening to the Spirit Unfolding podcast. I'm so grateful that you've joined us in this episode, and I hope that you've gained valuable insights and inspiration that you can apply to your own life. Please share it with your family, friends, and on social media. Thank you, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.